Hello lovelies, welcome back to Lucy Superfox Show. My name is Lucy Superfox, this is my podcast. Now if you are a highly sensitive and neurodivergent human, then you are absolutely in the right place, because I help highly sensitive and neurodivergent women get to the root of their problems rather than constantly managing the symptoms, whether that might be low self-esteem, low self-worth, or finding yourself in the same places with food, money, body, or business. So if that sounds a little bit like you, then you are in the right place. Now in today's episode, we are going to dive into why your attachment style might be running the show and ultimately ruining your life. So if you're curious about attachment styles, or you're early to understanding them, or you already know what yours might be, then hopefully this episode is going to give you an insight into why things are still ending up in the same place and what the root cause work is to shift it. So without further ado, let's dive in. So welcome my loves. So attachment styles is a really popular subject right now, and attachment styles has been around actually since the 1950s. There have been lots of later studies published on kind of adult attachment, and most people are familiar with it around romantic relationships, right? So most people understand it as the way they attach to other people tells them about whether they are, and the three types really kind of more generally generalized are anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, or fearful attachment. And sometimes that's called an anxious avoidant, where you're basically both, and that would be me. And it's a bit of a clusterfuck. So what these three umbrellas really stand for is an anxious attachment tends to be somebody who's a chronic worrier, who overthinks, who needs a lot of reassurance, fears often things like rejection, criticism, judgment, needs a lot of validation. That's kind of the behaviors you would see. And avoidant is somebody who won't look at their problems, often runs away from them, can often feel very kind of overwhelmed by them and then shuts down and pretends they're almost not there. And then an anxious avoidant is somebody who basically oscillates between the two. This shows up in romantic relationships in a way that when you're early dating, if you're an anxious person, you want to hear from them, you check every message, you want to see if they've replied, whereas an avoidant actually is someone that if that other person's too anxious, they get turned off, right? And so what can happen is a lot of people meet, an anxious and an avoidant meet, and it never goes anywhere, not because they weren't right for each other, but because the way they have learned to self-regulate, the way their attachment styles are leading their life currently, are meaning they're incompatible. It's honestly the cause of so many breakups, I'm absolutely sure of it. Now, if you're an anxious avoidant, you will do things like, if you're in an early relationship, if they don't meet you where you need, so if you're an anxious person and maybe they don't text you back enough, or maybe you didn't hear from them, or maybe you didn't get the response you wanted, you'd then punish them by not listening to them, not responding to their calls, being off or grumpy, and this is 100% me in the early stages of my relationship with my husband now. And so a lot of people understand this concept when it comes to romantic relationships. Now, if you're finding yourself chronically single, that's likely that you are probably sat maybe somewhere in the middle. And right now there's a fear of what happens when you go into a relationship, so you don't. And then actually the avoidance of let's just avoid it altogether. Now you can find out your attachment style. There's like 5 million quizzes on the internet. What's most important here is not what you know what your attachment style is, but that you understand something that is just not talked about enough in the books, is that I have a strong and powerful personal belief that you can heal your attachment style. Not everybody believes that. And in fact, I've just read a book by one of the guys who wrote one of the kind of really like profound books on attachment styles in adults. And nowhere in this book does it talk about healing the root cause of attachment trauma. And in fact, he lightly touches on it as a hypothesis and a concept and not actually a truth. And so I'm going to tell you what my personal belief the root cause of attachment trauma is, based on a lot of studies by the people in my world. So the somatic therapy world, the kind of the psychotherapy world, the world of kind of where healing and psychology cross, right? I'm going to talk about it from that perspective. And there's a great experiment. And if you've never seen this experiment, it's called the still face experiment. You can actually just find it on YouTube. And the still face experiment basically shows you how attachment trauma, we're going to use that word here, and I want you to touch it lightly. So attachment trauma, and when I talk about attachment trauma, I mean an attachment imprint. So where our ability and the way that we learn and the way we imprint other people is taught in basically our early development years. But what's happening is a lot of the material around attachment theory is talking about how we manage, how we cope, how we manage ourselves in adult life. And honestly, some of the strategies are just absolutely fucking ridiculous and are just not realistic at all. Unless every single adult human read the book, they're just not realistic. But what I really want to help people understand is where it comes from, and not because you need to overanalyze every inch of your past. And in fact, in my work with clients inside root cause therapy, we don't do that. We assess what is the root cause belief, what the symptoms that are, we go into the root cause experience and we clean it. And sometimes there isn't even a memory attached to it. My point is, attachment trauma or attachment imprints, in my opinion, are created in those early developmental years. The way that we attach to other people is taught to us by how safe we feel by our primary caregivers and the people that were supposed to care for us in our early development years. That doesn't just include our parents, that can include siblings, that can include nursery workers, that can include anybody that had a significant impact on our life in those early years. Now, my belief is not that we create these attachment styles because all of us have been through adverse experiences, and actually that children internalize things, especially highly sensitive, especially neurodivergent children, they internalize things in a much deeper and a much more felt way. So something as simple as mum being distracted for 10 minutes cooking dinner and not listening to us can be the same imprint as getting rejected now on a date or someone saying that they don't want to be with us anymore, right? And I'm not saying that literally, I'm not saying that's what happened and that's where that came from, but to help you understand that what happens in early developmental years is a much more intense experience because children at that age do not understand words. They don't understand logic. They don't understand what's practical. They only understand how they feel. So if you've never watched the Still Face Experiment, I would definitely recommend it. But the summary of it is, a small child goes into a room, this is all recorded, and the mum has a bug in her ear. So she has a kind of a practitioner in her ear telling her what to do. So they go into the room and the mum and the baby are playing with these toys. And the baby's like, oh, train, tractor, playing with the toys. And she's animated, she's engaged with him, right? Because babies learn to regulate themselves based on how attuned, the word is attuned, they are with their primary caregivers. So an attunement just means connected, watching, regulated, right? It's why babies are regulated when they're crying, they hand back to mum, they calm down. It's called regulation, it's attunement. So anyway, the Still Face Experiment shows you they're playing, they're animated, and then the bug in her ear says, go still. And the mum's face goes muted. She stops looking. She's very and the baby at first is like, curious, interested. And then he starts getting animated. He's like, mummy, pay me attention. He's like, he doesn't have full words yet. He's maybe 18 months. He's like hitting her, right? Because he wants her attention. He's banging the toys. He starts getting upset. He starts getting really, really upset. And then they say, okay, now come back to the room. Now, that's called a rupture and a repair, right? So the mum did a great job, but there was no lasting imprints there, right? There was a rupture of him feeling safe and connected to her, and then she repaired it by coming back and being present. Now, the theory that I hold that feels true to me, that feels true to my life experience, that feels true to working with clients is, if there wasn't frequent repair to the rupture of feeling safe as a child, that child attunes itself outwards. It looks for outside validation, it looks for outside regulation, it looks for outside things, and often it looks for outside dopamine. And this is where I hold a big belief that a lot of the ADHD symptomology, and I'm not saying the root cause of it, but a lot of the ADHD symptomology and the things that women find most difficult to manage often live inside this attachment or this attunement trauma imprint. And this is probably the most bold thing I've said on the internet, but that feels like an absolute truth to me based on everything I've read, everything I've studied, all the courses I've been inside. To me, this feels real. And if you've never watched Still Face Experiment, go watch it and it will just blow your mind. And why this is so important to understand is that so much of the material about attachment trauma is talking about how to cope, how to manage it, much like someone telling you how to manage your IBS. Don't you want to know what's fucking causing it and stop consuming it or fix the problem? Women with chronic fatigue syndrome, don't you want to know why you have it and get to the root and shift and change it? Women with chronic pain, don't you want to get to the root and shift and change that? There's so much noise about coping and management strategies. And this is why I became a root cause therapist, right? Because I didn't want to spend the rest of my life with my fibro diagnosis. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life with underactive thyroid. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life with a fucking eating disorder. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life anxiously attached. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life living under the weight of my varying diagnoses across varying things. I wanted to change. I wanted to shift. And so I fucking did, right? Because I did the work that now became the work I do and the work I teach. So I want you to also know that if this is the root cause of attachment trauma, the goal then isn't just to continually reach outside of ourselves to be soothed, to cope, to manage, like so much of the advice and strategies suggest, but instead it's actually to build that sense of internal safety inside of us that we don't need to look outside of us for management. We don't need to look outside of us for regulation. We don't need to look outside for validation, for judgment, for rejection to feel safe, because we teach ourselves to create that safety for ourselves. And this is the work I do one-to-one with clients. This is nervous system regulation. So the likelihood is, just like any other trauma imprint that's told you that this is the way life is, this is what happens for you, this is what's normal for your nervous system. If every single time you're in a dynamic with somebody new and you really want them to like you and you really want to impress them and you want them to validate you and you want to be their best friend, the likelihood is that is an attachment style imprint that is showing up for you again in adult life. And there's nothing wrong with it. Like, I want to release any judgment. I want to release any shame. I want to release any guilt that you might have around things that I've said today that resonate. But I want you to look at that and ask yourself if that is a sustainable way of living, that every single time you meet someone new, you're desperate for them to like you. If every single time you post something on the internet, you're terrified of rejection. Like, is that a sustainable way to live? Because if the answer is no, this is where the work comes in. This is where the root cause work comes in that I do one-to-one with clients, right? I'm not interested in helping you cope. I'm not helping and interested in you manage. I am interested in helping you find relief, and then regulation, and then restoration, and then rewiring, and then reprogramming. But what I'm not interested in is helping you manage and continually cope with the same situations, the same symptoms, and the same patterns. And this is why talk therapy can be so limited for many women, because understanding your patterns is only the first step. So if it sounds like right now your anxious or your avoidant attachment style is showing up for you in a big way in your life right now, and it's stopping you from actually achieving the things that you want. You know, one of the biggest patterns I see is an anxious attachment around money and an avoidant attachment around food. And I'm going to do a separate podcast on those particularly. You know, but one of the traits kind of anxious attachment around money is this constant fear of never enough, this constant fear of running out, this constant fear of, like, I need to do more, I need to hustle more. And I honestly believe it's one of the reasons women are so addicted to hustle culture is this chronic deep root cause belief of not enoughness. But when we have this anxious attachment style, it doesn't just show up in relationships, it shows up to how we relate to anything outside of us. It shows up in how we relate to money. It shows up in how we relate to food. So many of the clients I work with have such an interesting relationship with money that then is mirrored in their relationship with food. And it's normally anxious and avoidant, right? They're all in, they're controlling, they're worrying, they're stressing. And then the next minute they're like, fuck it, I can't look at it, overspend, spend loads of money, fuck it, have a binge, right? And it's the same set of attachment imprints showing up in different areas of life, because a relationship isn't just with a person. Our relationship to our environment, to how we do things, is ultimately the imprint of who we are. And this is why attachment styles and understanding attachment styles can be a really powerful first step for so many humans who are ready to change the patterns, who are ready to show up in their life differently. But that's why it's not the final destination, and that's what's so limited by so much of the material out there. So right now, if you've listened to this and you're like, oh, I'm curious about this, I want to find out more, then I would dive into my roadmap. I made a 25-minute workshop and a downloadable PDF on the exact 4-part method I walk women through on how to help them heal. Now, this roadmap is free. I have given you my exact method, spilled it all out so that you can see for yourself where you might be now and the steps that you are trying to skip and the bits that you are missing. And that's why you keep ending up in the same place. So if your attachment style or the patterns that you keep showing up in your life around attachment, whether it's with food, money, or relationships, keep ending up in the same place, then I would encourage you to check out the roadmap, and I'll put the link down in the show notes below. So in future episodes, I'm going to be talking about how your attachment style shows up with food, how it shows up with money, and ultimately what you can do to shift and change it at the root. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode. See you on the next one.